Yeah, let's bring in Stefan Romaniw, who's Vice President of the Ukrainian World Congress. He's an Australian Ukrainian joining us live from Melbourne. Thanks for joining us, Stefan. First up, your reaction to Vladimir Putin defending his actions, saying effectively that Ukraine has always been part of the Russian remit.
Thanks for having me on, Chris. Another example of toxic myths, Russian disinformation, taken out of Putin's college book of NKVD, KGB, obviously doesn't know history and thinks the world is as dumb as he is. The reaction of the Ukrainians in Australia is obviously one of alarm. We've obviously been lobbying our government, and we might come back to what we're doing there. But his actions in the last couple of days have shown that he never had any intention of any diplomatic relations or discussions. You know, Putin, when you do diplomacy, most places say if you're in diplomacy, you have a win-win situation. With Putin, there is no win-win. It's he wins, you lose. Now, the Ukrainian people won't stand for him coming in, trying to take something that's not his. Let's get one thing straight. Donetsk, Luhansk were, are, and will be Ukrainian. In 1991, 92% of the Ukrainian population, including Donetsk and Luhansk, voted for independence. 180 odd countries have recognised Ukraine in their diplomatic relations.
Well, let's go back to that independence, because in the 90s, Ukraine actually gave up massive nuclear weapons munitions. And in return for that, other countries, including Western nations, including the US, essentially said they'd have its back. Surely you must be shattered at the lack of Western resolve in support of Ukraine right now.
See, when Putin says that Ukraine is a failed state and Ukraine never existed, let's take Ukraine as a responsible member of the international community. The Budapest Convention, where they gave up their nuclear arms, they did that in good faith. They did that in good faith because Western countries said, we will protect you. Now we have a dilemma. It's time for protection. And now we're talking about sanctions. We're talking about a range of other things. One boot of Russian army in Ukraine will cause an international scene. It'll be something that ultimately we will all be sorry for. Ukraine has withstood Russian aggression for the last 8 years. I spoke to people last night in Odessa, in Zaporizhia, in Lviv, and also in Kyiv. And their message is a clear message. We're used to this. We know that he wants to invade, but we will stand firm. And I think today the international community has to have a good think about how it is going to respond.
Well, what are your worst fears, Stefan? What are your worst fears? Because at the moment, there's no sign that Western nations will give you any on-the-ground military support. I know Ukraine's got a massive military itself, second largest in Europe. You must fear a very, very bloody war of Ukrainian resistance.
We have lost 14 to 15,000 young soldiers, men and women, fighting Russian aggression in the east. If there's going to be an invasion, obviously the Ukrainian army, 260,000 or 200,000 or thereabouts reservists, plus what I was told last night, over 1 million people have signed up to be voluntary fighters for Ukraine. But there's going to be bloodshed. And I've said this a couple of times today. You know, if there is bloodshed and Ukrainians die, then the parents of those Ukrainians who die will say, my son or my daughter fought for Ukraine, for independence, for the right, for sovereignty. There are going to be Russians who die. What are Russian mothers going to say? What are they going to say when their child comes back in a box? Mr. Putin, you did this because of what? Because you want power? I think that the message here, Chris, is a very, very strong message. International peace is being challenged. International conventions are being challenged. Yeah. Any country that tests the sovereignty of another country needs to feel the full brunt.
Yeah,
And
the
now
other countries just have to stand up for them. It is a tragic situation. Stefan, thanks so much for joining us. We hope that there
Thanks
can
for
be
having me,
some
Chris.
sort of peaceful resolution. Perhaps we'll catch up
Thank
with you
you.
again next week. That's
Thanks very
Stefan Romaniw, who's with the Ukrainian World Congress. He's a vice president of that organisation and a Melbourne-based Australian Ukrainian.